Well, we have two wonderful phrases in the South. One of which is, "That ain't fair." That ain't fair. Another is, "That ain't right." That ain't right. And sometimes when you're watching March Madness, you use both of those great Southern expressions. And it reminds me a little bit, ironically, about the French Revolution. The French were looking at their society a couple hundred years ago, and they looked around and they said, "This ain't fair. This ain't fair." Life in 18th century France was like playing a game of Monopoly, where some people started the game with $1 and some started with $1 million. And you're all expected to play the game the way the hand is dealt. But they said, that ain't fair. The aristocracy ain't fair. So they killed it. Made things fair. Made things equal as they could. But they didn't stop there. I mean, just like any grade school child trying to convert inches into miles could tell you, this ain't fair. We got 10 fingers. Everything should be in 10. Meters, centimeters, liters. Change it all. Make everything base 10. Make everything make sense. Make everything fair. And so they killed miles, they killed inches, they killed ounces. And by and large, it was a great idea. The world caught on with the metric system, making things fair and equal. But there was one thing they couldn't kill, and that was the hour. That was time. For 2 years of the French Revolution, they took down all the clocks in France that had the numbers 1 through 12 and put instead up the numbers 1 through 10. It was a pretty slick way to get people to work a little bit longer. But it was the one thing the French Revolution couldn't change. The one measurement that couldn't catch on. Because even though a base 10 clock might be fair, it just ain't right. Just ain't right. As we were talking about last week, we get our 12 numbers on the clock, not from the French or the English or even the Romans, but from the ancient Egyptians. It was old by the time that Jesus was telling stories. And it's the one unit of measurement that Jesus used that we still use today. And so we read today one of the best stories that Jesus ever told about God. Reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20. Jesus looked at those following him, and he said that the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning at the first hour to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long, doing nothing?" because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." Then evening came. The owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 p.m. came, and each received a denarius. So when those who came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said. "And you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Was the master fair? Was he right? We are continuing my sermon series, Just 1 Hour. That's the last thing Jesus asked of his disciples right before he went to jail. "Would you please spend just 1 hour with me?" And if you only had an hour to tell people one story that Jesus told, this would be a good one. One that gets right at the heart of Jesus' message and our purpose as human beings. What's fair and what's right? Jesus tells a story that from the beginning puts us in the very middle of our one great hour of sharing offering. There is a social evil, a deep, penetrating human injustice that begins in the very first sentence of this story. There are more people in this little village that want jobs than there are jobs to go around. That's something that plagued first century Judea, and it's an injustice that stays with us today. That there's not enough jobs for the people who want to work, who are willing to work. Oftentimes in many towns, if you drive a pickup truck to the outskirts of town, you will find people standing at a certain place known to that community of day laborers. That they know, if I stand on this corner, the pickup trucks with the foreman drive by. And we might be able to hop in and do a day's worth of work without anyone checking our green card. No documentation, no taxes, but it's the best I can do for me and my family. That's what's happening here in the first century, 2,000 years ago. In every town in Judea, there was a spot on the corner of the street where a foreman could go and hire day laborers. If you read the English translation in the NIV, they sound kind of like there might be bums just lounging around on a telephone pole. That's not what's going on. The text says that these men are not sitting, watching the world go by. They are standing, hoping to hop into that pickup truck as it goes by. The workers who sit in a Palestinian village will not be fast enough to catch the foreman's shoulder as he walks by. It is only those who are standing, ready, who will be the ones to find the 3 spots, the 5 spots in the back of the pickup, while the lazier men are sitting in the dust. The foreman comes and hires some people. The text says at the first hour, at 6 in the morning on the Egyptian clock. He puts them into his pickup truck, takes them to the vineyard, and he says, I'll pay you a denarius. That is, we have to again use our table of weights and measures, our currency converter. The denarius was the minimum wage for a full day's work. It's what you could live on. That's another debate. Do we pay the lowest workers in our society enough to live on? But that's what it was in the ancient world, a denarius, enough to feed a man, his wife, and his children for one day. If you work a day in my vineyard in the heat of the sun, I will pay you enough today to feed your family. It's a little bit strange that it's the owner driving the pickup truck. Most owners of vineyards in the ancient world, like most owners of vineyards in Southern California, in a wine country, California, Santa Rosa, California, Sonoma, they're not driving around in the pickup trucks. A lot of them own banks in New York City and have other people work the vineyard for them. They're gentlemen farmers. It's the job of the foreman to drive the pickup. But for some odd reason, this owner is up at 6 in the morning offering jobs. A little time goes by, 3 more hours on the Egyptian clock. It's 9 in the morning, and the owner shows up again in his pickup. Do you want a job? He asks. Yes, I'm standing. Let me hop in. He says, I'll pay you what's right. Hop in. He comes back 3 more times until the text says he comes back at the 11th hour. In a 12-hour day of sunlight, that means there's just 1 more hour of sunlight. The sun is about to set, but you can pick a few more grapes if you hustle. And there are still men who have been standing, hoping, waiting, ridiculed by the village for being unemployed for 11 hours. For 11 hours they have been hoping and waiting to see that red pickup one more time. And there it comes. Once again, driven not by the foreman, but by the owner. Do you want a job? He asks. Yes. He doesn't promise them anything. Not a denarius, not what's right. He just says, hop in. I've got a job for you to do. It's one of the reasons why I love our outreach team. I love our Second Mile Ministries that we support. Why I love the One Great Hour of Sharing offering. The idea that there is more to life than being fair. Life ain't fair. I don't care if you've had a French Revolution. We all start the game with a different amount of monopoly money. Some of our little thimbles and irons travel around the board at a faster clip than the others. It ain't fair. But just giving everyone the same amount of money, no matter what, that ain't right. There is something deeply human about work. God has created us to work, to have meaning and purpose and a goal in our lives. So when the foreman drives up, he doesn't promise money. When the owner drives up, he doesn't promise money to the 11th hour worker. But he does promise dignity. Get out of the unemployment line, he says. Hop in my pickup truck. You've got a job today, even if it's only for 1 hour. The last hour passes. It's 12 o'clock. 6 in the evening. The sun has gone down on the Egyptian clock. And all of a sudden, the foreman shows up. And he's got the wallet. The master's wallet. And the master says, I want you to pay everyone their wage, starting with the last. And so the guys who worked just 1 hour show up, and he pays every one of them a living wage. Enough money not just to go buy some French fries at McDonald's to split 5 ways when they come home to their families, but enough money to pay the bills. A full day's work for 1 hour. It was not what they deserved. It was what they needed. It wasn't fair, but it was right. He pays the next worker who worked 3 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. Finally, the same workers who worked 12 hours all day in the sun, they too get enough to feed their families that day. And they start to complain. What are you doing? Shouldn't I have gotten more? I've been working hard. I gotta say, I worked on Wall Street. I would not invest in this business model. If this master, if the living God who we worship today had to file SEC filings, I don't think I'd be an investor. When I worked on Wall Street, their business model is to hire half the workers they need and pay them 1.5 times salary. That's smart. That's win-win for the owners, for the shareholders. You get the best workers and you save 50% on wages. That's a wise owner. And I gotta say, if this owner were being a little bit wiser, he would have paid people backwards from what he did. He could have paid the first workers, the guys who worked 12 hours, who feel like they earned that money. He could have paid them first, and they would have gone away happy. But he intentionally pays them last. Why? It's because he wants to make a point to these workers and to you about what the master's heart is. The point of this story is not how hard you work. The point of this story is how generous the master is. If you could just tell people one thing about Jesus, you could say, Jesus is God's proof to us that He is a generous master. Our religion, Christianity, is not about karma. It's not about working 12 spiritual hours, making 12 hours a day the important ethical decisions that then get the spiritual denarius, the ticket to heaven that'll give us a living wage in eternity. That's not what we're doing here. What the book of Romans tells us is that the wages for our life, for our contributions to the systemic deep evil in this world. Because we are guilty of doing things that ain't fair. And we are guilty of doing things that ain't right. The book of Romans says the wages that we deserve are death. In a fair and right and beautiful eternity, there's no place for us. And yet, we serve a master, a holy God who sent us his Son, the owner of the vineyard, to drive here in his pickup truck, to live the life we couldn't, to earn the wage we don't deserve, to pay us not what's fair, but what's right. A wage paid not with money, but with his own blood, so that each of us could feel the deep, right dignity of being children of the living God. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Even sinners like us. Let us pray.